Welcome to another video in my procurement strategy series. So far in this series, we've covered typical procurement challenges. We've talked about key performance indicators. We've also talked about how do you create a performance culture, and then what it means to create a leadership team that is really driving the whole system forward towards optimization. So getting the whole of the procurement operation working effectively as it can possibly be. Now I want to go on to talk about a model for developing the strategy itself. And it's come to mind when I've been thinking about this that although I've called this the procurement strategy series, I could have called it the procurement transformation series, because what we're talking about here is trying to elevate the level of performance within procurement or of the procurement function to a level beyond incremental improvement, but something much more substantial, where the leader and the leadership team and all of the participants in the system can eventually walk away and leave a very positive legacy behind of having truly transformed the procurement operation on behalf of the organization. So I want to go on and talk about a method for developing the specifics around the strategy. So what is it we're actually going to do? If our vision is to create a transformed procurement operation, then what are we actually going to do on the ground on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis that's going to genuinely impact the organization in a very tangible and sustainable way? And the method I'm going to talk about now, some of you may be familiar with it, but in my experience, many aren't. And that's this strategy mapping method. Now, strategy mapping was initially developed by Kaplan and Norton. And if you recall, Kaplan and Norton were the designers of the so-called balanced scorecard that was kind of launched in the 1990s and then became firmly established long afterwards as a method of measuring an organization's performance. And of course, in this series, we're talking about specifically the procurement function within an organization. And one of the things that Kaplan and Norton did in its implementation of the balanced scorecard across organizations like IBM, General Electric, Honeywell, and many, many others, they realized that in the implementation of the balanced scorecard, they uncovered a fact that there was no standardized method for developing strategy. There was no kind of model that was in existence, and effectively every organization had their own model. And you might say, well, that's okay. That's typically what organizations have done over many, many decades or forever. They've kind of worked out their own way of doing things. But when you overlay a study that was also done by Bane sometime later, and it's a long study, about 10 years, Bane uncovered the sad fact that only 9% of organizations were successful in implementing the strategies that they had declared were important to those businesses. So in effect, 91% of strategies kind of failed. They fell on stony ground, and during this implementation phase, the wheels began to come off. And it's no surprise to any of us who've been around for a while that organizations, it's completely typical that organizations kind of repackage the strategies and their initiatives, sometimes as a result of new leadership or some change elsewhere in the organization, or just when the organization's strategy runs out of steam. It kind of repackaging it buys a bit more time and kind of re-energizes the organization. So Kaplan and Norton developed this method called strategy mapping, and it is a systematic approach which is fundamentally based on one main principle, and that is cause and effect. And what this essentially means is that organizations or functions, they have to make a choice. They have to make a choice of things that we choose to do and things that we don't choose to do. Now, the reality of corporate existence is very often we find that organizations have a wish list of things they'd like to do. And very often those are very, very good ideas, and they push the right buttons, People nod in appreciation, say that's a good idea, we should be doing that. And gradually over time, the organization accumulates a whole series of different initiatives, which, I would suggest is almost like a wish list. And what organizations struggle with is letting failed initiatives or half-baked initiatives fall by the wayside. And what strategy mapping essentially does, it allows leaders and organizations to put a boundary around their strategy so that they focus on the initiatives and the organizational design, and I'll come on to that truly impact the outcomes of what they're trying to achieve, which are, for a private enterprise organization, is profitability and return on investment for shareholders. But also part of that is about delivering satisfied or delighted customers, all in the process of delivering a vision for what the organization is intending to achieve. So that boundary contains things that directly impact those outcomes. And it goes without saying, I guess, but I'm going to state it anyway, is that things that don't directly impact the success of the organization in customer, financial, or vision terms, these initiatives should be put to one side, maybe to revisit, but certainly not to invest heavily in if they don't have that tangible impact on the customers. So I'm going to quickly go through the model now. So let me just kind of talk about the various levels. So there are kind of 5 levels in a strategy map. The first one is the vision. What is it we're trying to do? Now, I'm going to talk about each of these in turn, but my proposition is that we're going to try and transform the procurement function here. So there's a vision of transformation. But in order to satisfy the businesses in which we operate, the organizations in which we operate, we have to contribute to financial outcomes, and indeed we need to deliver financial outcomes to stakeholders within the business that represent an undeniable, tangible benefit to that organization and its, of course, investors. In order to deliver those financial outcomes, we need to also satisfy and delight customers. So the idea being that if we satisfy and delight customers, we will deliver successful financial outcomes that will kind of, in a way, it will also it'll kind of reinforce the vision. So let me just try and restate that a little bit more simply. If we deliver satisfied customers, we deliver the financial outcomes, and we deliver the vision for our function or our organization. Then you go down to the next level, and the question then becomes, what processes do we need to excel at if we're going to deliver satisfied and delighted customers? And then the financial outcomes that then follow. So what are the things that we need to be not just competent at, but we need to excel at? Because procurement's contribution to business is, and should be, how do we create competitive or contribute to the collective competitive advantage of our organizations? So we're not just kind of turning the wheel here, we're trying to make things significantly better to make our organizations a whole lot more successful. So we have these processes and initiatives that directly impact our internal customers, which, we might call them stakeholders perhaps. But then, of course, we need to operate those processes, we need an organizational design, we need system support, and we need a training and development and, of course, recruitment processes that allow us to deliver the staff and the capacity to operate those processes that go on to delight, satisfy customers, and deliver the financial outcomes and allow us to achieve the vision for procurement. So what I'm going to do in the next video, or the next series, next few videos, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work through from the top about how do we create a transformational vision for procurement. What is it procurement must deliver in terms of financial outcomes for a typical procurement organization? What are the stakeholder constituencies that a typical organization would have within it that procurement must address and must support? And then typical processes, and then the infrastructure, people, IT, and structure. So I'll see you on the next video and we'll talk about a transformational vision for procurement.